Hello everyone. Today I'm covering game 1 from the Meijin-sen between Fujii Sota and Nagase Takuya. This game just ended last night, and oh my god, what an ending. So let's just get into it, because it's a pretty long one. So they again played Bishop Exchange, Reclining Silver, as they pretty much do in like all their games. And there's basically they followed a game that Fujii played recently in his Kyo-sen title match against Masuda. So let's kind of see how this game played out. So this is pretty much the classic Bishop Exchange Reclining Silver that people play now. And it's where you start seeing some very strange moves. After this rook to 2-9. And the reason that you start seeing strange moves in this position is because the natural moves are things like pawn 4-4 or like king 3-1 to kind of castle the king. And both of these moves kind of unlock an attack for Sente. So, just really quickly, if you play something like pawn to 4-4, we're going to be able to play pawn 4-5, trade off these pawns, and attack the knight's head on the 7th file. And if you play king 3-1, then that enables our knight to come to 4-5. It's threatening this silver. And depending on which way the silver goes, it enables a different way for us to get a pawn. Either we can exchange pawns in the second file, or we can sacrifice the knight on the 5-3 square and then attack the knight on 7-3. So both of these options are thought currently to be bad for Gote. So here Fujii decides to go ahead and retreat his silver. Again, a very strange move, but in this case I think it's specifically I have really no other moves, and okay, at least this defends the knight's head. And now, again, a couple more strange moves where they move their king to 6-9 and 4-1. The reason is kind of deep, but the basic idea is Sente would like to get the position where Gote goes to 3-1 immediately, and then they get to move the king to 7-9 after. It's just a slightly better position for Sente than otherwise. And so Gote kind of mirrors it. So it's kind of like this move order shenanigans that are going on, and really what you need to know at more of an amateur level, and also just to enjoy the game that they play, is that this is essentially now considered the standard move order for Bishop Exchange openings. Okay, so Nagase plays this move, rook to 2-7. This also kind of enables some like move order, shenanigans. But actually, I was watching commentary by Sasaki Yuki, and he actually says that this is kind of part of Nagase's research, is that instead of the rook guarding the back rank, it's actually more useful much later in the game if the rook is actually contributing to defending the 7th rank. And we're actually going to see it come into play in this game. So here, Fujii goes ahead and moves his silver back into the reclining silver position, and Nagase launches his attack with knight 4-5. So this move here, silver 2-2, is kind of the characteristic move, I would say, of this specific variation, and this is the variation that Masuda had introduced against Fujii in their Kyo title match. Now that game actually ended up being a senichite, or a repetition draw. And it was interesting to see Fujii decide to adopt Masuda's strategy as Gote. So in the Masuda game, Fujii was Sente, Masuda was Gote, and played this silver back to 2-2 move. At first, it looks kind of like a bad move because it walls off your king. But it turns out the evaluation doesn't drop so much, and it actually helps defend the edge. So if you retreat to 4-2, your edge becomes a bit vulnerable. Right, so it's a trade-off, obviously, but at least one that is interesting and that the pros want to explore. So we're going to explore it again in this game. So Nagase goes ahead and pushes this pawn, and then goes ahead and sacrifices the knight to 5-3. And now, this is also kind of a common trend in a lot of pro games recently, where you actually end up sacrificing a knight pretty early on in exchange for multiple pawns. So I think if you actually think about it, the knight only covers 2 squares. So in a way, it's almost equivalent to 2 pawns. At least in the early game, where you're not going to have that many opportunities for nice forks or knights that can start attacks that the jumping factor of the knight is not quite as valuable early on in the game. And in this specific variation, actually, after Fujii pushes his pawn on 6-5, Nagase gets this bishop drop. This is planned. It forks the knight and gold, so the only way to defend both pieces is to move the gold over, and now Nagase gets to make a horse while taking another pawn. So essentially, the trade of the opening here is that Nagase gives away a knight, and in exchange, he gets 3 pawns in his hand. He's created a wall for his opponent. He's been able to make a horse, and he has this pawn on 3-4 that's putting a ton of pressure on Fujii's king. So here it looks like quite a good trade, actually, for Nagase, and I think the engine agrees. But Fujii has an idea, and I think this is also Masuda's idea even, which is this knight drop on 5-2, forcing the horse back. Now, normally you don't really want to just drop pieces from hand into your own camp just to kind of push major pieces away. But because this is a knight, and in the specific board position, it has a really nice idea to get itself to 6-4, hitting the silver and pressuring the 7-6 square as well. To the point where you would even consider dropping it on 6-4. But since the horse is here, you might as well drop it on 5-2, kick it away first, and then you're going to be able to jump it to 6-4 later. So that's kind of Fujii's idea here. He goes ahead and pushes the edge pawn once, goes ahead and takes the pawn on the 6th file, pushes the 8th file pawn, and now he goes ahead and gets this knight back up to 6-4. And once you get to this position, you can kind of see the idea for why Gote likes playing this opening and why the pros are willing to play both sides of this opening currently. Is that it's an interesting, unbalanced trade-off. They're still kind of trying to figure out who's better, right? And where can I surprise my opponent in this variation. So Nagase goes ahead and retreats the silver. And Fujii goes ahead, captures the pawn. He pushes the rook back, and Nagase goes in with his horse, and Fujii is able to swing his rook around. So this helps activate the rook for an attack. It also kind of helps defend the king a little bit, but also a little bit weak to have your king and rook near each other. So now Nagase goes ahead and drops his pawn to threaten the knight, and he gets this silver trade. And he gets to drop it on 5-3. Now, this is where things started to get a little complicated and potentially a bit of a lead for Nagase after Fujii retreats this rook. So here there's a lot of things going on just in this area where, okay, now the rook is threatening the horse. The gold is threatening the silver. It's not super obvious how you get out of it. It actually looks bad at first glance. But it turns out that this silver taking the knight is a nice move. Because it ends up becoming a 2-piece exchange, right? So, okay, we saw Fujii drop this pawn, but if you just played it kind of straight out and you take this horse and then you take the gold, you got a knight and a gold for the horse. So it looked kind of in a bad spot. But it ends up being okay. So, and then also, obviously, if they take, then we're going to be able to come back here and fork the gold and the king. Okay, so Fujii finds this in-between move, pawn drop 8-8. And this is kind of where Nagase gives up a little bit of his advantage. And it kind of goes back to an even game when he takes back with the king. So instead, what he should have done is ignored this pawn drop, simply taken the gold. And then after pawn takes, king takes, and rook takes, it is now Nagase's turn, right? So basically, by forcing Fujii to take the knight on 8-9, that's a tempo loss for Fujii. And what that means is Nagase gets to play this move, knight drop 4-4, now. In the other variation, because he takes the pawn, and Fujii never played pawn takes knight, after the trade where the silver takes on 6-3 and the rook takes on 7-1, it's actually Fujii's turn. And Nagase basically never gets to play this knight drop on 4-4 the rest of the game. But it's actually that strong that the tempo that Nagase would have had to play this knight drop was worth actually sacrificing the knight on 8-9, which I think it's a very, very difficult decision to make here to really understand how strong this knight drop was. Okay, so Nagase takes, Fujii takes the horse, Nagase takes the gold, and here is the point where, if it was Nagase's turn, he'd be able to drop on that knight on 4-4. But because it's Fujii's turn, Fujii gets the initiative here, starting with this pawn drop. And this is where Nagase decided to play his sealed move, or the Fujite, because this is so this is basically the end of day one. And I think Nagase spent something like 2 hours thinking before he decided to seal the move as well. So here there's really only one move. Lance takes, and then here Fujii plays very natural move, right? Like attacking this file with the rook. And Nagase decides to defend it with the silver. Also attacking the knight. And the curious thing about this game, there are multiple times in this game, you can see how the evaluation is changing here, right? Where it likes the position for Nagase here. And this is even with a depth of 21, right? And it's saying silver 6-6. But when you play silver 6-6, the evaluation for Nagase goes down. And obviously, Fujii sees the right move, which is this bishop drop on 4-4. And it's actually quite painful for Nagase facing this move. Now, I mean, at first glance, it seems like an obvious move because it hits the silver. Silver is pinned to the king. But it's extra painful because you have a pawn on 5-7 and you can't drop a pawn to block. So Nagase goes ahead and blocks with the knight here. Fujii goes ahead and takes this pawn. And here, another mistake from Nagase. He goes ahead and defends the knight with pawn 5-6. The problem with the move is that all of Fujii's attacking pieces are staring at 7-7, including this rook. And it's actually an overwhelming attack. And so I think even a lot of the pro players were surprised that he didn't play pawn 7-2 in this position to block the rook. I think what Nagase didn't like was rook 6-1. Because here, if you drop a pawn and the rook goes back, you kind of use two pawns. You can't use them to defend here anymore. And this position, even the engine agrees, is good for Fujii. But I think what he missed is exactly how strong this move, promoted silver to 5-2, is. So obviously this hits the rook. But also, like if you look at Fujii's king, it's completely boxed in. So this is a gigantic threat, and it's not going to take much more. I think just like taking this knight is probably a Tsumero. So my guess is that he underestimated how strong this move was. Okay, but instead he goes ahead, defends the knight with the pawn. And I actually think another reason why he played this move is what we actually discussed very early on in the opening of why Nagase put his rook on 2-7, which is now the rook gets to help defend. And his rook on the right side of the board isn't doing that much. So I think he figured, okay, this lets me defend the knight, and I'm adding a defender, and it's going to activate my rook. I think that's kind of what he was thinking here. But it turns out that Fujii can just blast away at the 7-7 square anyway. So here, a bunch of trades go down. Fujii drops a pawn, and now Nagase drops the pawn here. And I think a lot of the pros were saying, well, once you get to this point and you feel like you need to drop the pawn, you probably should have just dropped the pawn earlier. But here, okay, Nagase kind of gets the payoff from putting the rook on 2-7. Now he gets to kind of bring the rook around, but it actually cost him an entire silver to do so. So here, Fujii goes ahead, runs the rook, and now Nagase goes ahead and plays this promoted silver move. Obviously, it's a little bit weaker than previously because it doesn't also hit the rook. But actually, it's still a Tsumero. That's the crazy thing. It's still a Tsumero because we got that knight in hand. So it's a Tsumero starting from knight drop on 4-3. And so Fujii has to respond to this with... technically, he could have also dropped the pawn on 4-1 to defend it. I don't quite understand the exact details of how that defends. But basically, okay, he decided to just create room for his king to run. So there's a gold trade. Fujii runs the king. And here is where some Fujii magic starts happening. So it turns out that in this position, the engine sees this is a completely even game if Nagase plays silver drop on 3-3. And okay, like even now, like the engine thinks now it's all of a sudden it's better for Fujii. So there's a lot of crazy engine evals going on in this game where like you can't actually look, now you can even see it just went back to the minus 0.5. So this is like the craziest thing about this game is that the engine eval was changing at depths of like 25, 26, 27, like pretty regularly. And almost always in the favor of what Fujii was doing. It was really, really, really crazy. But anyway, at least this would have been a decent continuation for Nagase. And instead, he plays this move, knight drop on 2-4. It is a Tsumero. Gold drop 3-2. But you can see the engine eval just swing drastically in Fujii's favor. The interesting thing about this is that the engine actually doesn't understand the full story of what happened with this move. It kind of seems to understand that something is wrong for Nagase, but the engine doesn't understand the full extent of what's happening. But Fujii does. And I'll explain a little bit at the end of the game. So, Fujii goes ahead and takes specifically with the silver, and Nagase takes with the pawn. And here was the jump out of your seat moment of this game. Engine is saying, yeah, okay, Fujii's completely winning. But it's saying bishop drop 6-6. And then the second move, knight drop on 9-6 is minus 11. It turns out that this is mate. And not only is this, it's mate in something on the order of between 41 and 37 moves. It's not, I don't think anybody's completely figured out for sure how many moves the optimal mating sequence is and what the optimal defensive maneuvers are for Nagase, but it's something on the order of between 37, 39, 41 moves. And you can see the engine doesn't see it yet. Obviously, it's only on a depth of 20, so it's a little bit difficult. But the crazy thing is it doesn't see the mate for like another 10, 15 moves. And this must have been an absolute shocker for Nagase when this move was played. And if you were watching the game, Fujii plays this move and just instantly gets up and leaves the room. Like, what are you going to do about this? It was something to see. Okay, so I'm not going to go through too many Tsume variations just because it's such a long Tsume. We're just going to enjoy Fujii mate Nagase here. And here's the second crazy part. Not just the knight sack, but immediate gold sack on 9-7. And it's really interesting to me because the engine doesn't see the mate, right? But it sees that gold 9-7 is good, right? So Nagase runs the king, bishop drop 8-8, runs the king again, sacrifices the gold. And you can even see again, look at the engine eval. It's down to -4. It was just -22, right? So the move that it wanted was bishop takes 7-7. It's like, we're winning if we just take the rook here. But Fujii's like, nah, we're just gonna mate the king, and the engine doesn't see it. It's crazy. Okay, so Nagase takes, and again, Fujii just sacks the bishop. And here's where the engine first starts to see some mating lines. You can see it thinks it's mate in 48 at depth 29. It's wrong too. It's still wrong. So here, king runs, and somehow it thinks that when the king runs, it's not mate anymore. Now, okay, depth is at 16 instead. But yeah, here we go. Okay, rook drops 6-8. King runs. Rook sack. And here is where the engine finally catches up to Fujii and sees, oh, I see your mating sequence now. It's mate in 30 from here. Okay, king takes. Bishop 6-6, or horse 6-6. Block with the knight. Horse sack. King takes. This gets our rook in with a promotion. Blocks with the gold. I believe the gold has to block here because otherwise when you drop the knight and the king runs, the dragon could go to 7-7. So that I remember that is specifically the point of dropping a gold here instead of like a pawn. Okay, so knight drop, king runs to 6-6, knight drop again, king, and I actually think technically Nagase resigned in this position. I don't quite remember, right? Because it's a complicated mate. I need to put all of the moves, so I don't quite remember exactly where he resigned. But if I recall the game, this is actually where Nagase resigned. I mean, it's still mate in 16, but I mean, you'd be completely demoralized if you got here and read the mate in 16, like, oh my god, what is happening? Okay, king runs, silver back to 5, or sorry, bishop back to 5-3. Okay, no, this is where Nagase resigned. Sorry, this is where Nagase resigned. Okay, so it's mate in 14. I'm not gonna go over it too much. I saw some people maybe arguing, maybe Fujii was kind of just feeling that he's gonna be able to trap the king somehow, or even if you go back, where was it? Go back to when the engine just wanted to say we're winning if we take this rook on 7-7. And maybe, I think you could maybe argue this, for example, if Fujii was in Byoyomi or something, he only has a minute per move, and it's like, okay, I feel something, okay, let's see how it develops, let's pressure him. But I wanted to go back to when Nagase dropped this knight on 2-4. Because I looked at this specifically. What was the time remaining on Fujii's clock when, and what was his time usage like throughout this mating sequence? And it turns out that when Nagase makes this knight drop, Fujii had 69 minutes left on his clock. And he actually spent 37 minutes thinking here before taking the knight with the silver. So to me, this is not a rushed decision. It's not a desperate one either. He spent the 37 minutes and he read that this move is a tsumero, starting from this knight sack, gold sack, and 30-some move mating line, which is just absolutely mind-blowing. And hence my my thumbnail that this guy is not human. Right, he just won the Tsume Shogi Championship, and he's really showing off again his Tsume skills here. So this was a crazy ending. Mate in 39 or 41. I really don't even know. The engine doesn't even know. No one knows except Fujii. And man, like, how is anybody gonna beat this guy? It's actually mind blowing that someone actually beat him. Right, in the AO match last year. And then even Itodani beat him so that he didn't get the challenge for that. But this is one of the most impressive things I've seen from any shogi player ever. So yeah, thanks for watching. Hopefully I'll cover all of the other games from this title match and other title matches in the future. Thanks for watching.